So we're going to talk today about just dive into it like a technical topic because we did handover, we did something about the whiteboard. One of them we did was about P&IDs and particularly smart P&ID, and that one actually was pretty well received by our audience. And so I was just thinking, okay, what should we talk about?
Massive audience.
Yeah, it got
awesome.
hundreds of views. There you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Of thousands.
Yeah, maybe. And so this time I was just thinking, okay, how about talking about instrumentation? You often reference, when we talked about administrators, you'll throw in references to an instrumentation administrator, or we'll talk about a database or something like that. So there is a particular application that's, I don't want to say dominant, that's kind of a harsh word, but like a very frequently used application in the industry to cover that. And I figured we'd just kind of dive into that topic, like why is that a popular tool? What does it do? Talk a little bit about that. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds good. I think it's, one of the reasons why I think it's kind of dominant is because it's, you have a lot of deliverables. And when you say dominant, I guess the main application you're talking about would be like SmartPlant Instrumentation.
Yeah, we're going to talk specifically about an app. So for example, we did
SmartPlant Instrumentation.
Right, I did a 3D podcast and we touched on Aviva, E3D, Hexagon S3D, CADWorks, Autodesk, AutoPlant.
Yeah.
There's like a whole bunch of players, in that 3D space. But then when you go over and you say, how does the industry, both engineering and operations, manage instrumentation? There's really only one prominent application that gets used in that space.
Yes, that's right. And that's SmartPlant Instrumentation.
Well, hold on. No, it's not.
From Hexagon. Now it's something else.
It was originally Intergraph InTools.
It was originally InTools.
And then it got renamed to Hexagon SmartPlant Instrumentation. Then it was temporarily renamed to Hexagon Smart Instrumentation.
Yeah.
Which was odd because there is such a thing as a smart instrument in the field.
Correct.
So that was always difficult. So people actually held on to the SPI name.
Some people still call it InTools.
and now it's because Hexagon split and Octave is the new area where the engineering tools are. It's going to be Octave Facets Instrumentation. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. I don't know if the facet before instrumentation or after. Is it instrumentation facet?
I don't think so.
Is it a facet?
Facets, because there's a facets P&ID, facets electrical, facet. Okay, because every product is going to apparently have a musical theme. Which I guess we're going to talk about in one of our user forums coming up. So there is, for example, for this app, there is a technical user forum that you currently are the chair of. Is that correct?
Yeah. So currently I am the chair of the Hexagon or Smart Instrumentation User Forum, and it primarily is around the instrument, the application itself.
It is specifically around the application.
Specifically around the application itself. It does go in to how you manage some of the data and how you manage some of the attributes and getting that into project execution and into your operations. But it's primarily a technical forum around the application itself.
And that's like 100
administration of it.
That's like 100 administrators and users that get together once every quarter or so, and they kind of get an update from the vendor, and they talk about what's working for them and what's not working and what kind of bugs or fixes are in place and all that type of stuff, right?
As a plug on that, we are going to have a meeting on May the 12th. So we can provide the link on this video. So if you want to join that, please sign up. Because we will have a meeting and we'll be talking about the application itself, how it's used in operations. So there'll be an owner-operator panel, and then there'll be an EPC panel, how it's used in an EPC.
Okay, and when we were talking about handover, this app is one of those apps that is a part of the handover discussion where it originates as a project tool on by the EPC generally, and then
it's one of
gets moved over and run in operations for the life cycle of the plant.
One of what I would consider is one of the engineering and design authoring apps. So in that ecosystem that we talked about for the digital twin, a part of that is like an engineering and design ecosystem, and you got a number of authoring apps where the information or the data is actually being generated or created. SmartPlant Instrumentation is one of them. P&ID is another. 3D is another. Right. Those author the data though. They're not just storing it or just necessarily like integrating it with other applications.
There's a layer above that for information management or doc control, where these the deliverables, the outputs from these authoring tools get generated up to that level. But we're specifically talking about an application that is used day to day to build new items, build drawings, create the schematics and everything for the project. And so, for the purpose of this discussion, we're going to call it SPI.
SPI.
Okay.
I still call it SPI, even in the forums that we run, the technical forum. I call it SPI
for the next 35 minutes or whatever. It's going to be SPI.
It's going to be called SPI. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I'm okay with it.
Okay, and like when we talked application administrator, that persona, that role that we talked about, that this app is one of those apps that has a dedicated administrator persona. You actually worked
has to have a dedicated,
Okay. And there was a point in your career where you were primarily an SPI administrator. Is that correct?
Yeah, I started out as an instrument tech in the field, and then got into control system design and engineering, and then instrument design and engineering, and then for a number of years. And I'm not going to say how many because it makes me feel old, but I actually worked as a SmartPlant instrumentation administrator, in like an administrator group, overseeing large capital projects, overseeing handover into base plant operations for the application, for the data within it, overseeing the deliverables that are coming out of it, how the system was set up and configured to better create those deliverables or better help your workflows or whatnot. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, let's just remember this podcast is about SPI, not about you.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Sorry.
No, we were talking yesterday.
I was giving a little background on myself to help build it up.
It's great.
So that our users, whoever's viewing this, understand that I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, it gives you some credibility.
Yeah, it gives you some credibility, right?
Okay, great. Well,
because I'm arrogant.
Oh no. But we were talking, okay, what should we talk about next? And it's like, okay, well, why don't we just talk about why that app is basically on most projects? And it because either we see people use in sort of the North American context, I mean, even globally, it's still the app we see the most. And second to it is probably just Excel and AutoCAD.
I would say it's one of the apps we see the most, both on kind of both sides, I guess, both on the engineering and design side and on the owner-operator side. On the engineering and design side, I guess you do see a lot of the 3D modeling, but definitely on the owner-operator side, for the engineering-based applications, I would say that SmartPlant Instrumentation is like one of the number one app really that is used out there.
I think a lot of people adopted it. If you look at the industry, 3D has been around for a long time because the technology, or if you're either going to build it with like wood sticks and models and plastic, or you're going to put it in software. 3D was adopted pretty early, right? In the 90s or whatever, maybe even a little further back, it was a prominent thing to have a 3D model. But the next, like the other discipline that seemed to adopt a database type tool early was instrumentation. The P&IDs have been a little slower, electrical slower, but but instrumentation all the way back to the 90s, and I think it's partially because that discipline was related to the automation team, and the automation team were programmers, and so it felt like the instrument automation folks were comfortable with a database tool earlier than most disciplines.
Yeah, I'm sure that did, I'm sure that did influence that a lot. I think it is just because of the amount of deliverables that you deal with when you are in instrumentation. So you're dealing with quite a bit of deliverables, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying a minute ago. And it doesn't matter if you're in operations or you're in project execution, you have like the same type of deliverables. So you get your instrument index, you get your instrument specifications, your process data sheets, you get your wiring drawings, your I/O loading, you get your loop drawings out of it, right? You could even get your installation details out of it. So it's one of the apps that you're actually producing a lot of deliverables out of the application based on the data that you're authoring.
Well, it's one of those
right?
disciplines, though, too, that has a lot of volume. Correct.
It has a lot of volume. Yeah.
So if you look at a plant, a facility, let's say it might have 100,000 instruments at one of the new modern big plants. Okay,
Yeah.
so if you have 100,000 instruments, and we're talking, and we mean tags. So
yeah,
you have a transmitter, a valve, a positioner, limit switches. You have different tags, but if you have in a scenario like that, you could have as many as 50,000 data sheets, because of those tags,
yeah,
a good 40 to 50% of them have a data sheet. Where there's about anywhere from 50 to 100 properties that say, for this transmitter, we're buying it for this process, for this function, for this range, and it's going to be mounted this way. And so that's all gets put in a data sheet. And what you're saying is SPI is a place where I go in, I build the tag, and I build that data sheet as a document, and I fill in all of the information for that as a starter. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's all like associated and linked because it's an enterprise application with an actual data structured backend, right? So, and that's why I was saying I think it came almost out of necessity, because what you were doing traditionally, and what some still do it today, but not very many. When you're doing a project or you're maintaining a facility, and you're messing or you're maintaining those thousands of tags for your instrumentation, the traditional way of doing it was, hey, I got an Excel file for my index. I got an Excel file for each one of my specification
sheets. For each of those specs. So each transmitter or valve.
Yeah,
so
I got an Excel file for each process data sheet. And then you go to your CAD and you're like, well, now I got a CAD file for my junction box drawing. I got a CAD file for my marshalling. I got a CAD file for my loop drawing. I got a CAD file, so on, for my I/O loading, so on and so forth. And what it does is it kind of says, hey, I'm going to take all of those deliverables, I'm going to build that out from a data perspective within a single application, and then all of those deliverables become much more manageable, because then you're only updating the data in one place, and it's updating all of those documents, right?
Yeah. What you mean by that? For example, if I have a tag in my index, so it's your list of tags, and it has a description, and it has a manufacturer and a model. Okay, that's in my tag list.
Then
but that's also going to be on my data sheet,
on your spec sheet.
So, but those two data points are the same. They're just shown, one of them in a list, one of them in a data sheet. Yeah. And then if I have a loop drawing for that device, some of that same information
might be on the loop.
Needs to be on that loop, which is a wiring diagram for how that thing is wired. So typically, the way the industry breaks it down is the spec sheet, and you mentioned process data sheet, which is really just a companion to tell you where does that thing sit, what kind of chemicals it's dealing with, what kind of scenarios it's dealing with. So
what kind of scenarios?
It's like the chemical engineering focal point of the instrument, whereas the data sheet might be more in the I&E focal point, and those two come together.
Kind of crossover.
They come together, and they generally, when people think of the engineering side of the tool, that's what you would say an engineer does, is manage the process data sheet and the instrument spec sheet. And then the designer in the industry is the person that would generally build the junction box and take the wiring from that device through a junction box, through a marshalling rack, into an I/O card. So this app in particular supports the whole workforce around that discipline.
Correct.
So you got folks that come into the office at their engineering company and they sit down. One of them's working on the engineering spec, one of them's working on the wiring, but they're side by side. They're logging into the same tool. They're looking at the same data, and they're just sharing the responsibility for that object, right? And
that's right.
Building it out.
Yeah, and I mean, you can go. We have seen some go into like the installation details and your hookups to get your BOMs,
which would fit in the design side.
Which would fit in the design side.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's so. Like I said, I think it was adopted out of necessity, because whether you're an owner operator or an EPC that's authoring the data on a project or something, you have to manage all of those deliverables in that entire discipline for instrumentation, right? So you have to manage that somehow. And traditionally, it was managed very siloed and file based, right? So if you updated the manufacturer model in your example in your index, then you'd have to go to the specs, make sure it's updated there. Then you'd have to go to the loop drawings. If it's on the loop drawings, make sure it's updated there, right? Whereas now, that's all in a kind of a single repository where you can update it one time based on the asset, and it updates all of those deliverables.
Also, the format is maintained globally. So, for example, if I have a transmitter and it's a pressure transmitter, it has one format in the tool.
Oh, yeah.
So if I all of a sudden have a bright idea as the engineer to add another piece of data to that, I have to go to my administrator and say, hey, I think we need another piece of data on this spec sheet. And that administrator then can say, yeah, but have you considered the ramification to the other instruments?
Yeah, that's a big one that we see.
And when you're using it, and when you're trying to do this same task with just a whole bunch of files, if you imagine just a directory full of 10,000 Excel files, well then, somebody can just go change the format. They can tweak a header, they can move something around, and then all of a sudden now you have this inconsistency buried within this directory you don't even really know about.
That's a great point, because it does kind of put some standardization around that, right? So you do have like a specification library where you don't have the variance that you're talking about, because a lot of times what we see on some of these projects, even on a project, but then in the owner operator world is okay, well, I have a flow transmitter spec. Well, I have one from EPC 1, EPC 2 looks totally different, even though the device is pretty much the same. And then you got a vendor spec that also looks different. And now if you're having to maintain that from a file-based perspective, not only are you having to maintain the data itself, you're also having to maintain the standard of what that report looks like.
Yeah.
And that becomes difficult. But that's also in your tag naming conventions, right? Like you would think that, everybody's going to use the same tag naming convention on a project. Not so, right? Mm-hmm. But the application itself kind of handles that and does that as well. In your loop drawings, same thing. You can kind of standardize on how your wiring drawings look like, how your installation details, hookups, appear and look like, which makes it easier to manage.
Now you crossed over a bit there, because I'm kind of painting a picture inside of the engineering project first, and then we can consider that from the bigger picture as an owner of multiple facilities. But if I'm looking inside of one project, that standardized format brings me value just locally to that project, because I can execute that one job and maintain all my formats, and everyone who's on the team is working with the same basic footprint. But then, like you're saying, let's look down the road at project, A, B, and C over a handful of years. They all go to one owner. Owner sanctions them with different contractors, and those guys potentially do work differently. For example, if you're file based, then they're surely going to do
It's
some
all over the place.
crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And then when you receive it, you don't have the continuity, you don't have the consistency in your data. Now, there is a little bit of an issue from an SPI perspective in that you can have different contractors use the tool slightly differently. That goes back to our handover discussion, and I don't think we want to open that can of worms here necessarily, other than to say we're describing a universe for the purpose of this podcast where you have that one database, one format, and let's go with
let's go with that
sort of utopian case, right?
I wouldn't call it utopian because utopian.
Little far. It's a little far.
Well, utopian is something that's unachievable, right?
Okay.
I think it's very achievable.
Okay. Now, when we talk about the engineering side and the specifications, they're not really being auto-generated. You're entering data into the tag, and it's visible on the spec. But the spec is a fairly simple document, and you're just filling in cells, right? But when you go to the wiring, some of that is auto-generated because you actually, in the tool, you just make the connections. So you build a virtual junction box, you build a virtual marshalling rack, IO card, you drag and drop cables, and instead of like the AutoCAD style where you're formatting every cable and you're putting the nuances of drafting into this, in this tool, you're just trying to get all the data laid out and connected. And then when you actually want to hit the button and generate, because I mentioned, let's say the representative case, 100,000 instruments, 50,000 specs. Well, you're going to have 30,000 loop drawings of a flow control loop that's going to have the transmitter and the valve and the I2P shown on one wiring diagram, so a technician can troubleshoot why that flow loop's not working. So if you're going to have 30,000 of those, one of the big selling points of the tool is, hey, once you've done rather the simplified connections of all of those objects, then you hit the auto create button and it'll
start creating loop drawings.
Bulk loop drawings in bulk, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big efficiency pieces of the tool. I'd say from the engineering side, it's more about just having a nice standardized format, a nice repository of the data. And then from the design side, you really are asking the tool to augment the work or improve the efficiency of the work, right?
Yeah, I would say so. And from looking at the two different sides of it, I would say, hey, that's one of the reasons that your EPCs, right, or your contractors or your vendors, they actually adopted the tool first, really, because not only are they having to manage all of those deliverables and all that documentation, they need to be able to execute more efficiently. They need to be able to run reporting more efficiently, right?
Well, and some people were doing this like with an Access database, and they were trying to auto-create.
They were trying
AutoCAD.
to auto-create the AutoCAD.
And so you were you were auto-generating some of this, but it took a lot more of your own personal development. It was riskier. It was harder to manage.
That's right.
And you were dealing with tools that weren't really geared specifically to solve that problem. And here SPI was built specifically to say, all right, you input all of this data. We're going to create in a couple of days, thousands of drawings from that.
Correct. Right? Yeah. And so I would say that's primarily why in my opinion, it was adopted more on the EPC side first, right? That's because they're actually executing projects, and everything they do is, based on man hours or schedule or budget. And so they need to be as efficient as they possibly can, right? And that's what they're looking to do.
Right. Now, the owner side of this, I would say in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, was when I started seeing more owners saying, well, if you've already done all that and it's already packaged in this one spot, and you had a project team with a whole bunch of people working in it, and that all worked out okay, I think I'm just going to take that thing and hold on to it, and I'll just keep using it. I don't need to use it for as much. I'm not going to author as much new stuff, but I'm going to do my updates in there. I'm just going to hold on to it and just maintain it. Is that what you saw?
I would say that comes into our kind of our handover discussion that we talked about last time. When your handover was a bunch of documents, So even if the EPC works in that type of data centric environment, if they hand over a bunch of documents, well, the owner still has to make changes through MOCs or whatever small projects they might be doing. They're going to make changes to those same deliverables, those same loop drawings, those same spec sheets. Well, instead of handing over 30,000 loop drawings, why don't you just hand over the database? That's kind of like the evolution of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you just hand over the database and then the owner can just maintain the data in the database?
Yeah, but SPI was the first one that we saw that become popular.
Because 100%.
Like the electrical discipline, first off, they don't really use the smart electrical tool set as much.
Yeah.
And almost no owners use it.
Yeah.
Whereas SPI, it's almost every project and a majority of the owners are using it in their for long-term maintenance. So, and part of that, you touched on it earlier, part of the reason there is that discipline has so much volume that the tool has a return on investment. Whereas
I think the ROI for an owner on instrumentation is incredibly high because of the volume that it's dealing with.
And I mean, I like smart P&IDs and that type of stuff, but the smart P&ID doesn't get maintained as frequently as instrumentation does because people look at it and it boils down to a couple hundred drawings usually, which is there's value in the smart tool, but not quite as much return on investment. So if I looked at it like the 3D model often doesn't get maintained for operations because of cost. The P&IDs sometimes just get put into CAD because it's their security blanket but it feels manageable.
It feels manageable, yeah.
Electrical often doesn't use smart tools in either the project or the operations as much because there's less volume and the discipline itself wasn't as cool with the database idea. But then instrumentation is the one that makes the leap across the most and is the most used lifecycle tool, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's the most used from a lifecycle perspective. And like I said, I think that's because of the volume of information and the volume of deliverables that come out of it that have to be maintained even in an operating plant. You still have to maintain all of that.
Yeah.
And so then the question is how are you going to maintain it? You're going to maintain it in a single repository that makes it easy to do that, makes it easy to maintain the information. It makes it easy to integrate it into your other asset management systems, your other maintenance management systems, or are you going to go back to more of a file-based system where you're maintaining individual files? I mean, it's almost a no-brainer in my opinion.
Yeah, and also what happens is so you have a whole lot of folks that use it during the project, and then it transitions into operations. The user count shrinks a little bit, but the viewers are big. A lot of people need the data because of the volume we talked about, but you don't have that many authors. But then over time, when that facility needs projects, you do have some new authors that come in. They go back to working in the tool to generate the modifications to the plant, and it just becomes this steward of that data for the life cycle.
Yeah, and it's one of the tools I think that has, and again, maybe this came out of necessity. I don't really know, but the idea is that the EPC may have, if it's a new project, right? Totally new project, totally new plant. The EPC is using this to gain efficiency to build it. And then the handover is hey, we built this. The owner wants to keep it and maintain it. Well, when the next project comes along, it actually has the capability to create like a internal project environment that the EPC can then work in, right? Which adds great benefit because then you're not necessarily passing a bunch of, if you got 30,000 loop drawings and you're doing an expansion or debottleneck, maybe they're touching 5,000 of those. You're not passing 5,000 loop drawings over. You're not passing thousands of specs over. You're just saying, hey, I'm going to create a project environment, EPC, for you to come in and work on all of those assets, work on all those deliverables, and it's right here for you.
Yeah,
which is a good thing.
Okay, so we chose today to focus on one like specific app, and a lot of the stuff we've done has been more generic. Like we're just trying to be
Yeah.
in the loop of the industry. But that does lead me to a question, which is why this app versus other software providers?
Other softwares like Aviva or uh, Comos or something of that
Yeah.
nature. Um, I would say in my opinion is why it's that way or engineering. I think there's engineering base out of the UK or EU.
Germany.
Is it Germany?
I think
Yeah.
so.
I would say it's just the most mature, to be honest with you. And the next one would be Aviva, in my opinion. The other ones are there. But I would say that the Hexagon Smart Plan is just the most mature. It creates the uh, most deliverables. It's set up for both the engineering side, so the engineering design project side, and the owner operator side. So it handles that the entire life cycle the best in my opinion.
I
Um,
mean, because if you look at projects, North American projects, I I can I can't really think of any significant projects that I know of that have used another. I can think of projects that used Excel and
yeah,
AutoCAD.
yeah.
I can't really think of any others that have used a competitive product right now.
Not in the instrument space. No, I not a lot. I mean, I've ran up in some of those other ones. Most of those other ones, I'll be honest with you, are on the project side.
Project
So
only, so they
project only.
don't really think about the life
Like
cycle.
an engineering base is the only place I've actually seen that implemented is on like a project side of it when they're doing the engineering design. Um, I've I've never really ran across anybody doing it on the owner operator side, but I think that's because those other applications aren't as mature and they don't really have that full life cycle standing. So now I think that there are some vendors out there that are working diligently to get the full life cycle. So and Aviva would be the front runner in that. So they're advancing their Aviva instrumentation to kind of include that full life cycle. I just don't necessarily think they're there yet.
Well, I think one thing that people often wonder is, all right, we just spent a time talking about 3D instrument, electrical, P&ID, and when I'm saying that, those are actually separate,
Those are
right?
separate things.
And so I
Yeah.
feel like the industry has been trying to sell the idea that all of those are supposed to be one. And so it's like individually, I don't think anybody's competing well with SPI because the industry hasn't figured out how to make those things work as one yet. Some people have tried with different integration software packages or a more comprehensive suite that supposedly is all tied together to where you draw it in one place and it magically shows up in the other and it shows up everywhere. But what we're seeing most frequently is that the standalone versions are still dominant right now. They're still the primary way that these tools get used. And so it feels like the other providers have put their focus on that integrated suite, and that's coming slower to be useful. So it almost feels like right now nobody's challenging SPI as the best on an individual basis.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're right. They're moving more to the quote unquote integrated what concurrent engineering or whatever you want to call it in that aspect. I think I mean that's where you're kind of getting into your utopian ideals there, in my opinion, right? And that goes back to even your administrators. E- the, each of those applications, and when you're missing with data, sometimes people don't think about it like this, but each of those applications are actually authoring information, engineering information, or design information. So instrumentation, You're actually authoring specifications. You're actually authoring process conditions for the instrumentation. You're actually authoring. When I say authoring, I mean creating that. You're not just consuming it, you're creating it. And to be able to do that, you have to have domain knowledge. Like, you have to know instrument engineering. You have to know instrument design. And you can't say, hey, this guy that's been designing, no offense to you, but been designing P&IDs, hey, just come over here and start speccing out instrumentation. No, that's like a specific skill set, right? Within the industry, and just knowledge base. And so I don't think you can just combine all of those tools into one thing.
Would you agree, though, that's a bit of the debate? Is like, oh, that tool looks good on its own, but that's not impressive enough. I heard that there's some other tool that just does it all at one time. And the reaction to that is generally, yeah, I've heard the same thing. That's supposedly the goal the North Star we're all running toward, except for some reason right now, it actually works okay in this sort of, not siloed, but still discipline-specific tools.
The problem that I see in that is it's easy to think like that because there are crossovers. So P&ID, we'll just use P&ID and instrumentation because they're very closely related. Well, P&ID, you have all
of those instruments tags that we talked about are drawn on a P&ID.
Are drawn on a P&ID. Yeah. So you have all of the tags, and you're thinking, oh, well, why can't these just tie together? And you're like, okay, well, but they do. They're two different things. You're trying to create a P&ID to create the actual P&ID deliverable. The instrument guy is trying to create the actual specification of that, the details of what is needed for that specific device, right? Mm-hmm. And not only that, I mean, you get into the other topic is not all of your instruments actually show up on a P&ID, right?
Yeah. Like, so I think where we're going there is that becomes a discussion on integration, which is a whole new topic. Podcast.
Yeah, that would be a whole nother topic. But in my opinion, though, is that those, you got to think about it on what it is you're actually producing out of those applications. Those applications are the author of data. They are not the consumer of data. Those are two different things.
Easier to be a consumer. That's what you're implying?
It's easier to be a consumer. It's to be an author, you have to understand the engineering and the design behind it. You have to understand the domain knowledge behind it to be an author of it.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and so this was a good starting point.
That's also why your admin, you can't have one admin that admins all of the applications, right?
It's harder to do that.
Because it's harder to do that. They might know the actual functionality, maybe a little bit of each application. Like, hey, I know how to install one application and the other application, but they don't effectively know how to manage it for project execution or maintenance.
Yeah. Okay. Right? Well, that's a deep dive into like a specific application that we see in the industry that's very popular, very successful.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, has, like we said, administrators that are dedicated to it. It has user forums that are dedicated to it. It's got a lot of history and it's been successful. Not to say that the other vendors aren't providing good stuff and that maybe that playing field will level a little bit in the future. But right now, playing field's a little slanted, and that application is leading the market. I'll put it to you that way from what we see.
From an instrumentation perspective, I would agree.
And it almost
smart. The Hexagon or Octave Smart Instrumentation is the leader. But I will say that leaders can forget that they're leaders sometimes, and upcomers can move fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
and one of those is Aviva. Aviva's doing some pretty neat things to make some strides there.
Yeah.
So
and in summary, really, if you're building a project in the energy sort of process chemicals refining space, the whole discipline around instrumentation, not the programming of automation and not the electrical motors and whatnot, but the almost the entirety of the instrument discipline can be done and executed within that one tool.
Within that one
That's fair.
tool. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, that's a deep dive into SPI, in tools, facets, instrumentation, the whole deal. I think we'll have a follow up at some point where we dive into that integration topic. So
Yeah, we should dive into the integration and dive into the other tools. Dive into 3D and PNID and electrical, right?
yeah,
I mean, I think it would be good to dive into all of those. Do remember that we do have the LTA for instrumentation coming up on the 12th. So we can put the link out on this video and sign up and come check it out.
all right. Thank you.
Thank you.